All right, good morning, everyone. This is Doug Lacombe from Communicatto, and welcome to the Beat Boring Business Blog Syndrome webinar. We're going to get started here. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the hashtag for this event is Ban Boring Blogs. You can see it there on your screen, I hope. Ban Boring Blogs, which I think we can all agree is a good public health issue. No one needs to be put into a coma by a blog, and sometimes corporate blogs are doing exactly that. So we will be doing our best to beat down the boring business blog syndrome with some tips and tricks and some tactics that we use at Communicatto for our clients. We've been blogging for 9 years for multiple clients without ever missing a week. So we feel like we have some time in the trenches and some things to share with you. So greetings, everyone. Welcome. You're all on mute, so if you have questions or if anything's going wrong on your end, we'll do our best to help you, although tech support on the fly can be a bit tricky, but certainly we'll do our best. But the chat window is there in Join Me. There's a little a bubble icon on your screen, and so if you have any questions, just go ahead and pump them in the chat window, and then my colleagues will draw that to my attention, and we'll do our best to answer whatever questions you have. Your coffee, of course, is wherever the heck your coffee is, so go ahead and get that if you need it, and your washroom is wherever it is, so just please put your phone on mute because we don't need to hear the flush. Oh yeah, we already muted you, so it's safe. Okay, good, we're good. So that's basically the housekeeping stuff, and we are recording this, and the slides will be provided in a follow-up blog post, so you don't need to take crazy notes, or at least you don't need to write down the things that are on the slide. So with that said, we're at 10:02, and let's kick off and start talking about how to make a blog a really lively, entertaining, and audience-attracting kind of communications function. So first of all, a lot of folks, I think, are still stuck with the misperception that a blog is more like a daily journal or a diary or something, and of course all it means is that it's a continuously refreshed publishing platform, generally part of an organization's website, and hopefully it's full of opinions and facts and information as opposed to stream of consciousness stuff. Now obviously there are hobbyist bloggers, and they just do whatever they want, but this is from a corporate or an association or an organizational context, and the point is that your content should be feeding into your greater communications goals and your business goals. So what is a blog? Well, some things that would indicate that a blog is in fact a blog kept fresh. So if you're not in fact hitting the cadence of weekly minimum, for example, preferably more often, then it really isn't a blog, and quite often we find folks who call something a blog, but in fact it turns out to just be a web page with new things put in every 6 months. That's really not going to satisfy the definition of a blog, and more importantly, that won't satisfy Google in terms of fresh content being published on some cadence. So generally, it's in reverse chronological order. There's the ability to comment, and of course you want that to be moderated so people don't just say wacky stuff. Please note that getting people to comment on a blog is nigh on impossible, and so generally speaking, that's probably not your expectation that you should have. If they comment on it, it'll be out on social, and that's a sort of a separate thing, a community management offshoot of blogging, but you want categories, tags, archives, and search, basically ways to categorize the content in the blog. These are all native features of WordPress, which is the world's largest blogging platform, but it makes it really easy for both humans and search engines to comb through and categorize that content, which again helps with your search engine optimization. Blogs are typically short, they're typically not long form, so maybe 300-400 words, sometimes even just a few sentences on top of some multimedia, like, hey, here's our slides from last week, or here's a video of me talking to somebody, or whatever, PDFs, embeds, any kind of rich media, even memes, infographics, and so on. Definitely trying to hit a casual or a more layperson type tone, and that's one of the key elements is the writing style. That keeps it from being boring, and headlines have to grab attention. So definitely not in the sort of press release style of writing, but much more in the conversational layperson style, and with what we sometimes call a tabloid-esque headline, which doesn't have to be crazy or weird, but it certainly has to be attention-grabbing. And then easily shareable, widely syndicated, easy to get by whatever device or platform you want, typically email, and you got to get audience, and so you can be blogging away to nobody or to you and your 3 friends, and that can be a bit of a sad, lonely exercise. You definitely don't want that. So those are the things that we think define a good and proper blog, and underpinning the whole thing is the fact that the fundamentals of writing still apply. If you're not using good journalistic standards, good CP style, good headline writing, then you simply won't attract the audience, or you won't retain the audience. They'll bail out on you. So that starts with the old inverted pyramid, long a standard of J School, journalism school professors. Headline and lead, you know, give it to me up front. Why do I care about this piece of content? Give me the 5 W's very early on, who, what, where, when, and why. I need to know the essence of this blog post to know if I should devote more time to continue on into the details and then the final detail. So in most cases, you're going to want your blog to lead to some kind of a call to action. Now, that call to action could be as simple as please share this, or it could be, you know, please subscribe, or it could be download our white paper, or whatever. But if you don't use this inverted pyramid and essentially lure the reader down through the story, the chances are they're going to bail out early on, because people have very, very short attention spans, something in the order of 10 to 15 seconds to catch their attention. So you definitely need to punch it up on the front end. There are structural things, so many of us would be familiar with the Chicago Style Manual, or AP Style, or in Canada, CP Style. Of course, the old classic from English degrees, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. But there's this handy web style guide that originally came out of Yale University, something in the order of 30 years ago, and it's been continuously refreshed. And it speaks about the structure, sort of the HTML, not really the code, but the user interface elements that allow for good web writing to thrive. So you're dealing with a backlit screen as opposed to reflective when you're reading on paper, and so that requires things like chunking and bolding and bullet lists and listicles and all kinds of stuff that basically tees you up for good readability. And that's especially important on a screen, because screens are hard on our eyes. So you need to set the reader up for success. So you want to avoid jargon. You want to aim for about a grade 9 level, maybe a little less. You've got about a 5-second rule in that headline and lead to get them in, and then another maybe 10 seconds of skimmable, scannable stuff to keep them moving through the story. You got to use chunking. Give it visual relief. Give it white space, quotes, pull quotes, emphasis, bold, and your content should be hierarchical, both in the sense of the logic, but also in the HTML sense of H1 or a headline 1 should be bigger and above a headline 2 and a headline 3 and a headline 4, etc., all the way down to headline 6. And the reason for that is then Google has an easier time of categorizing it and indexing it when things are in proper order. So sometimes designers like to fool around and make an H3 bigger than an H4, or sorry, an H2, and that's not good. Because it just confuses Google. Finally, if you want somebody to do something, you want a strong call to action, and sometimes we joke about BOBs, which are big orange buttons, or a strong conclusion. So basically, download now. Do not be subtle with these sorts of things. And I like to go back to some of the classics like David Ogilvy and Ogilvy on Advertising, where plain, simple language, words that are compelling to humans, that have always been compelling to humans, or at least in recent history, like free, new, you, your. Ogilvy has a ton of that stuff in Ogilvy on Advertising, and you can Google David Ogilvy and get reams of stuff. But, you know, he's quite right. Our business is infested with idiots who try to impress by using pretentious jargon. That's a barrier to readership, and it's not going to do you any good. So no sense trying to be a smarty pants. Just get your point across and make it entertaining, and you're going to get a lot better results out of your blog. One of the things to do is to use the active voice. I mean, that's just good writing in general. But, you know, when there's action, when there's verbs, when there are people doing things, when there's human interest, it's a more interesting blog post. So passive sounds tentative. It sounds like you're not really serious about what's happened, or it erodes credibility, whereas the active voice is much more clear and direct and less awkward, very much more concise. So an example of Bob wrote the paper versus the paper was written by Bob. There's absolutely no reason to do the paper was written by Bob, when the first example serves as an excellent example of just how to write a plain English sentence. So always be on the lookout for the verb to be and how it is used, and Microsoft will tell you, if you do a grammar check, whether you're using the passive voice or the active voice, so you can certainly keep an eye on yourself there. We all slip into the habit. I think it sounds, you know, like more formal writing, and certainly in corporate writing that's almost like a knee-jerk reaction, but avoiding that passive voice is super important. And using words in a conversational manner, right, like you speak. So all the fancy pants words like utilize, there's no need for that word. That word can go away in blogging, and you can just use. Or instead of attempt, you can use try. I often think of it as the closer you can get to Middle English or Old English or even guttural grunts, the more communicative you are. And so, you know, this is not a thesis, and it's certainly not a PhD dissertation, so try and make your blogs as approachable as possible for regular humans, because your job is to get your point across, not to showcase how many words you know. So boring business blog syndrome. How do we recognize it? Well, there's no blood test. You might listen to someone's heart, and if it's stopped, well, then clearly they're bored to death. But basically, the silent killers that make a blog boring are things like you know, your timing is off. You don't only publish every couple of months or every, you know, even longer. And approvals basically take what was maybe a decent piece of copy and then grind the life out of it, especially if a finance or engineer or science type people are involved. They're going to want to get every single detail in there, and that's a barrier to good communication. So always remember, your goal is to communicate a high level concept and not to in fact document every aspect of whatever it is you're writing about. You don't want the corporate voice, you want a human voice. Now that doesn't mean you have to identify the writer, although that helps and can be nice, but you know, show like use the first person and say things like we talked to Bob, and you know, really try and make it more human. If you have a lack of intent and you're just trying to spout off sort of corporate messages, that's obviously not going to play well. If it looks like you know, advertising, or you know, if you're being overly hyperbolic or persuasive, then people will be like, they're just trying to snow me. And remember, it's about the audience, so produce content that they want to hear or see or read or consume. But you know, then you have to wrap your stuff in that package. So ultimately it comes down to readability and design. If people can get it on their cell phone, consume it, and move on with their life, then mission accomplished. And so some of the symptoms, if you dread writing it, boy, imagine how the reader feels. Like our puppy dog here, that's going to be a giant snooze and not a lot of fun. You'll see the evidence in your data, low readership, the traffic won't be good, the high bounce rates might indicate that they pop in, look at a sentence or two, and then run away screaming. Dismal average time on page, no return readers or viewers, and no social actions or sharing, likes, comments, etc. So all of those things should give you a clue that we're not quite hitting the mark here, which is, strangely enough, maybe an opportunity to say, what could we do to please our audience? And this is what traditional media has done for decades, millennia, whatever. They worry constantly about, is the audience consuming this, and do they like it, and is it meeting the needs of the audience? And that's how a blogger has to think, just like the media. So obviously the risk, not to be too tongue-in-cheek, is you publish a boring blog, nobody pays any attention, nothing happens, your boss is annoyed, and you don't meet your business objectives. And so that's just an exercise in futility and frustration. Clearly no one wants to go through that. So you really need to sort of preempt these risks, or mitigate these risks, and set out to cure boring business blog syndrome with some of these tips and your own personal style. So we've got 10 tips here that you might find useful. And the first one is pretty simple. Get organized. Blogs, if you wake up in the morning and you're like, gee, what should I blog about? It's blogging day today. You're already hooped. There's no way you're going to pull it off in any graceful manner. You won't get good interviewees. You'll be in a rush. It'll be on the corner of your desk amongst the other priorities you have. So you really need to have an editorial calendar. You need to have pre-identified interviewees. How do I introduce the human interest angle, the story angle, and are we promoting this properly? Is that all synchronized? So without that organizational structure, it's going to be really hard to produce quality content, and so that's dedicating resources that didn't used to get dedicated to this sort of thing. We weren't really producing this level or this amount of content in the past, but now that really is part and parcel of content marketing and public relations and marketing in general. So you need to be organized. You need to write with purpose. And so it's not just this stream of consciousness like, oh, we gave money to, charity X, or we did this. That might be something you would cover, but really it has to tie back to comms goals, and that has to tie back to business goals. So if you are updating your content strategy regularly, if you are aiming your content at specific personas, that is target audiences that you have sketched out and identified, if you're being generous with your content so that people feel like they're getting value from that without too many strings attached, and if your readers know what they're supposed to do about it, then you're serving those readers and you're giving the readers what they want to hear versus what you want to say. Now, again, obviously you're doing this with purpose and you need to say some things, but you have to wrap those things up in what readers want to hear, because nobody has time in their life to be like, and another thing about my organization that I want you to know. Who cares? We're all very busy, and so there needs to be a payoff for the reader, and that's really the quid pro quo that allows you to earn your audience. So knowing your audience is key to this, because if you don't know who you're trying to talk to, if you haven't done the personas, if you haven't done the research, if you haven't done the reader surveys, then you don't know what they're looking for, and so then your guesswork is almost certainly going to be wrong, or at least partly wrong. So you need to incorporate feedback from readers, you need to survey them, you need to ask them what they want to hear from you, and what they want to, what freebies they want in terms of, say, white papers or fact sheets, or what information would be useful, and you need to engage with them. So your reader wants to know what's in it for them, or what's in it for me, and that requires sort of audience management. You don't just sort of guess and shoot it out there and spray and pray as we used to do in the old days. You really need to concentrate on knowing that audience well. Tip number 4 is have a point of view. Take a damn stand. If your blog is wishy-washy, no one will pay attention. You need to show some passion, show some conviction, take a position. I remember Kirk LaPointe, editor of the Vancouver Sun back in the day. Now I think he's editor-in-chief at Business in Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. He said after his first year of blogging that the blogs that didn't work, or the posts that didn't work, were the ones that were sort of vanilla and did these guys said and those guys said, which is sort of in the realm of traditional journalism, this sense of objectivity. But when he actually took a stand and treated it more like an op-ed, then readers actually got fired up and participated and shared and talked about it and so on. So you sort of have to be a little bit courageous and take a stand, because nobody has time for more vanilla nonsense. And you have to tell a story. Are you connecting with your readers on an emotional level? Have you introduced a human, and is there some kind of a story arc? Are you only sharing good news stories, or have you in fact earned some credibility by being transparent and willing to show maybe some of the skeletons in your closet, or some of the failures, or some of the glitches? Or and if you want your content to be more sticky, you really have to get into a storytelling mode. And you know, from cave painting days through you know, all the different parables that we would have grown up with in children's books, you know, once upon a time, bunch of stuff happens and they lived happily ever after, is the story arc that has lasted through you know, the ages. And so playing with story structure is really important, paying attention to how that inverted pyramid is actually structured. So do all the blogs look and read the same? Are they kind of big seas of gray text? Are the headlines click-worthy and interesting? You know, you don't have to go all BuzzFeed on it, but you certainly need to punch it up a bit. And using listicles, you know, 5 ways to blah, 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 10 things we learned, and 6 photos of da-da-da, interviews, Q&As, you switch it up basically, and then include multimedia. Don't get caught in the text-only syndrome. Sometimes a couple of sentences in a video is all you need. It doesn't even have to be your video. It could be somebody else's video and you just put your opinion on top of it, and that can constitute a very useful blog post, because then you're essentially curating decent content for your audience. And so that's a service of sort, or an act of generosity that you could consider. So it doesn't have to be as laborious as writing a 1,000-word long-form piece every week. In fact, it shouldn't be. You definitely need to ditch the corporate speak. So whenever folks try to introduce the, you know, industry-leading, cutting-edge, world-class, blah, blah, synergy, get rid of that crap. Your content needs to feature real people saying or doing meaningful things. You need guests or new voices. It can't always be the VP of whatever. It can't always be the CEO. You have to avoid jargon, even when you're talking to a niche audience. Minimal jargon is going to go a long way to enhancing comprehension and consumption, and basically the entertainment factor of your blog. You want the content to be unique. It should reflect your voice and the personality of your organization. So if someone else is saying the same thing you are, then what's your unique differentiator? What are you using? Rich media? Are you wanting to be seen as an authority on topic X? And if so, what's your angle? How do I know you're not the same as the other 10 blogs I read? So you definitely want to package it up in such a way, whether that be through the headlines or through the people's voices that you use, the stories you tell, even the form of rich or multimedia that makes you stand out from the crowd. It's increasingly difficult to pierce the clutter and the noise, because everybody's a blogger, so being diligent about changing it up and experimenting and failing fast, and then measure, you know, the old measure twice, cut once. And so you really want to know, have you established success measures, 3 or 4 KPIs, you know, preferably with calls to action, so you can get into things like conversion rate optimization. So probably a lot of you have gone to, let's say, Facebook, and you've seen, oh, there's an article I think I'd like to read. You click on the article, and then on the page you wind up with a more, or read the rest of this article. That is a conversion point that that publisher is using to understand if people are bailing out after the first paragraph or not. It's a far superior method to measure some form of engagement or whether the reader's engaged than say page, which is a sort of a faulty Google measure, or not faulty, but it's fraught with difficulties that make it somewhat inaccurate. So you want to make sure, of course, you have Google Analytics. It's free. If you don't, then that's just crazy. And you want to know, you know, not only page views and time on page and bounce rate, but what's their path in and out of the website, and are they being led into the website through a blog post, and then, oh look, they went from there off to you know, maybe the services section or the about us section. And finally, do you know what your top performing content is? And I don't mean just last month or last quarter. We regularly find that stories that we wrote 2, 3, 4 years ago suddenly crop up and become super popular again. So popularly that's known as long tail content, and that kind of content just does yeoman's labor year after year after year. So understanding how a piece of content keeps paying you back in traffic and engagement is really important, and your analytics can tell you that if you set up your dashboard and your KPIs correctly. And then finally, can people even get into the thing? So, you know, if the blog is a bit of a dog's breakfast, if the user interface is crappy, if it's inaccessible to people with disabilities, if you have, you know, let some rogue designer go mental with the headlines and the H2s are bigger than the H1s, you've confused the reader, you've confused Google. So certainly learning a little bit about user interface design, and you know, even just having a cohort of friends or target readers look through it and say, hey, is this thing readable or not? Especially on different devices. You can go further. You can use the Google page speed tool to see if it's fast enough. You can use GT metrics as a speed tool that helps too, because quite frankly, if it takes more than about 10 seconds, or well, really less, to load, 5 seconds might be the threshold, then forget it. I'm moving on to some different blog. I'm not waiting for your site to load. And mobile friendliness. Again, if you Google mobile friendly test tool, or Google's mobile friendly test tool, it'll tell you if this thing is loading quickly and in a friendly fashion that can be seen on mobile. So if people are on the metro or the C train, or you know, they're sitting waiting for an appointment, chances are they're on their phone, and your blog post needs to accommodate them in their own environment. So moving on to sort of internal acceptance, leadership are often, you know, they're under the misapprehension that, or the misperception rather, that you know, blogs are stream of consciousness and you know, all that diary nonsense. And so really it helps with your leadership to gather feedback from the readers, use data to make your case, analytics data. Certainly you can do time over time, like, look, we used to have no traffic to our website, now we have lots of traffic to our website. And assuming you've done your targeting correctly, then that will be quality audience, not just junk audience. You want to certainly listen to and address leadership concerns. They might be afraid that people will comment with negative comments. Well, there's a likelihood they will. There's a greater likelihood that people will just ignore you because you typically have to work pretty hard to get an audience. They're going to want to know, what's the ROI for this? If we're in the publishing business, why? And brand management, reputation, preparation for crisis, government relations, paving the way for sales, customer satisfaction, establishing an employee brand or an employer brand or employee value proposition. All of those are reasons, good business reasons to publish. But just saying everybody's doing it, or we just think we need fresh content on the site, that's unlikely to be persuasive to the C-suite. You should do a lot of little pilot projects, a lot of little skunkworks things, some A/B testing, and find free and low-cost software tools to do that, so that you can say, oh, these headlines sucked, but those headlines work great. Videos were amazing, text was not so amazing, or infographics did nothing for us, but text did, got all the readership. Whatever your circumstance is, and of course it depends on your target audience. If you're aiming at, government policy analysts and you're hoping to influence votes in the legislature or the House of Commons, well, that's going to require a certain style of writing and a certain approach, versus if you just want people to eat healthier, or if you're reaching out to the public to maybe buy your product or service, which is not an area that we play in too much, but then you really need to do A/B testing to understand, oh man, I don't know, more people downloaded the white paper or bought shoes or bought pizza when we used a red headline than a blue headline. Who knew? That kind of stuff is easily achievable in digital, and is the discipline of good digital marketing. You want to find a champion, make sure that you're, whoever you report up to, VP or director, whatever level, is on board and not skeptical. And you're going to have to start slow. This is probably going to be a phased-in thing that will take a couple of years at a minimum to go from 0 to 60. You're not going to become a huge publication like BuzzFeed or whatever, Mashable, etc., overnight. And you really want to differentiate between hard news, like say investor relations stuff, and then editorial content, which is sort of the softer, or the branding, or the educational, or the customer relations stuff. And you have to resource the thing, because if you do not budget for it and either bring people in to help, or subcontract it or whatever, then there's no way you're going to hit your deadlines on weekly blogging. And as I said, that is a discipline that is very familiar to media folks, but not so familiar in corporate environments, although obviously getting much more so as time goes on. So with that said, keep calm and write on is our general modus operandi, and use that, all those tips and tricks to make that writing quality writing that the audience responds well to. But ultimately, it's going to be data that tells you whether you're doing the job or not. So we can take some questions from the audience, and hopefully crank this up into a lively and with any luck, educational conversation. But I do want to point out that on your screen is a URL. Some of you may already have downloaded this, but our thinking on how to execute a good digital marketing strategy is captured in a white paper, which we call the Flight Manual. We use aviation metaphors galore, so be prepared for all kinds of goofy talk about first class and steerage and flight crews and all that. So if you go to communicatto.com/flight-manual or flight-manual, then you'll be able to get that download. Yes, we'll hit you with a couple of emails asking you if you want some other stuff. You can easily unsubscribe. Of course, we're CASL compliant and everything, so it truly is free with no strings attached. But if you're prepared to hang around and kind of get some of our other thoughts and our other webinars and things, then we would welcome you to be on the list. So with that said, let's open it up to questions. I'm going to just pop open my chat window here, and if anybody has a question, just hit your little speech bubble and type it in, and we'll do our best to talk about whatever it is that you might be struggling with or wondering about in terms of beating down your boring blog and bringing it back to life. We got radio silence here. So either everybody's doing amazing blogging or I've had no sound this entire time. Let's hope that's not the case. That would be a really crappy webinar. We'd have to use that as a case study. Certainly, we're happy to help you if you're asking questions on Twitter. Again, that hashtag, which we can use into the following days, was ban boring blogs, which I think is just a worthy cause unto itself. Do you use any tools to manage your editorial calendar or low-tech it in Excel? That's a great question. So we struggle with that, and I think the answer is roughly depends on the client and their tolerance for tools. Some folks, some clients of ours use Excel, and the reason is because all the rest of their stuff is in Excel, and we sort of can't fight City Hall on that one. We often use Basecamp and its multi-layered calendar so that we can share individual calendars with individual clients, and then we can see a roll-up of all the clients and all their stuff. We know that tools like CoSchedule, for example, are very sophisticated, somewhat on the expensive side, but still definitely worth looking at. And then there are database tools like airtable.com that a lot of large publishing houses use. It's very inexpensive. It's sort of like Microsoft Access on a web-based platform, so sort of databases for dummies in a sense, and you can put workflow in, and I guess another powered-up spreadsheet that's similar to that would be something like Smartsheet. So all of those tools we've tried, and we typically keep coming back to Basecamp just because it's dead simple. But like I said, with a couple of clients, they have so much invested in Excel that we conform to their needs. Next question, maybe just more tips on how to manage the approval process. I am one that struggles with leadership trying to complicate language. How can I increase their comfort with plain language? Well, increasing comfort typically is an educational process, so that can involve a number of things. One, and my first line of defense would be to use data. So if you put out a piece of content, and if you're in a position to do an A/B test on it and try, your version with plain language versus their version with complicated language, then let the data speak for itself. And we've certainly been able to do lots of that with landing page copy. That's an area that lends itself naturally to that. You can absolutely do A/B testing on blog posts, although that's maybe a little less common, but data tends to trump everything. And so my default when somebody says, no, you need to do it this way, is to trot out some data and go, actually, I did the research and that's wrong. So that would be, my first line of defense. Also, it helps to bring in, whether that's professional bloggers, an agency, an English professor, a journalist, an ex-journalist, somebody who knows writing and can say definitively, why there is a body of evidence that says that your complicated crap is not going to get readership and you just need to get over yourselves. And of course, that's very hard to say when you work for somebody, but it's actually fairly easy to say when you're a consultant, because you can leave the room and you don't have to live with that person every single day. So So I would say, maybe getting a little bit of outside help and validation. Where we tend to struggle is when we get opinions, right? So if our opinion is it should be written this way and somebody else's opinion is it should be written that way, then that's really tough to justify, because then you wind up in a he said, she said. And so data and outside validation tend to overcome those particular internal struggles. So it sounds like that was useful to you, so I'm glad to hear that. Other questions on blogging process, writing style, analytics, performance management, data, anything at all. We're here at your disposal. I have zero budget. What is your recommendation for a free analytics tool? Definitely Google Analytics. It's free. So if you go on, depending on what your blogging platform is, but let's say you use WordPress.org, which is different than the paid-for or self-hosted WordPress.com. Sorry, I got that backwards. If you use WordPress.com, which can be free, they also have paid versions, but the freebie, then your platform's taken care of, and then that will integrate seamlessly with Google Analytics. Also, WordPress.com, if that's the position that you're in, is a fully turnkey blogging software solution. Has their own analytics, and I think it's powered by the plugin called Jetpack, which is part and parcel of WordPress.com. So anyway, basically WordPress.com. If you have your own blog or your own website and it's hosted on some, whether that's GoDaddy or, Rackspace or whatever, then still Google Analytics is free, and so definitely use that. It's the big daddy of all the analytics tools, and unless you're super duper enterprise class, you don't need anything else. It'll do more than what you need, but you will probably need a little bit of help getting it coded in there so that the analytics are clocking things correctly. So hopefully that helps, but it is free. So zero budget, it actually suits your circumstance. Anyone else have any questions? Is writer's block a myth? What about procrastination dressed up as perfectionism? Can you touch on the need for writers of blogs to just get at it? Yes, it's not a myth at all. No, writer's block is, and I think writer's block in many respects, I mean, notwithstanding, say novelists or short story writers, so not talking fiction here, but if you're staring at a blank page and today is the day you're supposed to have the blog out, then chances are that pressure will cause you to have writer's block and you will not do your best work at a minimum. And certainly I'm probably more guilty of procrastination than anyone. Partly because I grew up in a newspaper, and so essentially if things aren't on fire, it's not that interesting to me. The key there, I think, is back to our comments on organizational structure. Knowing that here's my next 12 blog posts, here are the topics, here's the theme for the quarter, here are the potential interviewees, having 2 or 3 in the mix at any given time so that if one interviewee bombs out on you, then the other interviewee fills in and you can slot in that story instead of the one you intended to. So it's really more about the organization. If you think about how mainstream media organizes themselves, they have a story lineup, they have an editorial meeting in the morning typically. Nowadays they publish to the web all day long and then sort of flesh out the story as time goes. If they're still on some kind of a scheduled interval, like a supper time newscast or morning paper, then they will have subsequent follow-up meetings, but obviously there's a deadline where the story goes or doesn't go. So making it as factory-like as possible without seeming like machine writing is kind of the key, and that's where I think people maybe have the impression that this is more art than science, but I think it's actually more science than art. I would definitely recommend the editorial calendar and regular editorial meetings, and keeping a few plates spinning at a time, so that if a story dies on you, then, or an interviewee bombs out, then you've got some recourse. So Shannon has asked, is a vlog a good thing to throw into the mix to keep it interesting? No question it is. Video is a high-performing, high click-through type of media or content. So absolutely, vlogging, again, with all the same, what's the theme, what's the purpose, what's the call to action, being succinct and all those sorts of things. But it's a great way to add personality, and it's pretty cheap and cheerful to stick an iPhone in somebody's face and essentially make a vlog out of that. So this can be fairly guerrilla marketing. It also conveys a sense of authenticity if you're actually, at the factory floor or at the farm gate, or, talking to the CEO, but it's crap lighting and not the super polished environment. That adds to sort of a sense of transparency and trust. So definitely video blogs or vlogs are worthy of consideration. There's a fellow, you should Google a gentleman named Warren Weeks, who does a presentation at conferences that he and I often wind up speaking at together, or not together, but we're at the same conference and we each speak. And his is, video, just do it already. And he's got some great examples there. So if you're interested in video blogging, just Google Warren Weeks out of Toronto, and you'll get some good content from him. So finding interesting things to write about can be challenging. Can you touch on where and how to find topics? Yeah, I think the short answer is research, which unfortunately just looks like hard work. But that research can take a variety of forms. So one thing is, what words are people using to find your website and your blog? So just basic keyword research from search engine optimization or your Google Analytics sources can tell you, oh man, they typed in blah and they wound up on our blog. That's weird. I didn't know they were looking for us under that word. And so that could be indicative, if you get some volume, that could be indicative of words and phrases that people are curious about. There's a ton of keyword tools. I particularly like a tool, it's a paid-for tool. SEMrush uses a content magic or a keyword magic tool, and so you pump in words about your business or your company or your area, and then it spits out words that are sort of related and relevant. So that's definitely a good brainstorming tactic. If you want to go old school, you can do mind mapping. So, take a core of an idea like, I don't know, we have the best product, and then say, well, why do we have the best product? Well, it's made with these materials. Well, okay, where do the materials come from? And, from this guy that makes them in a shop in Guelph, Ontario, and it's very handcrafted and da-da-da. So, again, weaving a story out of a thread of logic and turning it into a human interest story. We use Sprout Social as our social media management dashboard, and it has some trend tools and keyword tools, hashtag tools even. So those are all, but basically words. So how do I find the words that people care about? And the answer is use your analytics, use your tools, and do a little bit of keyword research, and then that will tend to surface the core themes that people are worried about. And so whether that's safety or, will your stock ever be profitable, or, why did I invest in this company, or should I work there, or, something to do with, oil and gas and regulation or whatever it is, those words will have meaning to a very niche and niche constituent audience, and so you can spin stories out of those words once you know what they're curious about. I mean, even at the highest level, just go to Google Trends and see what people are searching for, and now obviously, unless you're somewhat suicidal, you probably don't want to use like a Donald Trump hashtag or a some other Justin Bieber-like thing or whatever. But beyond that, if you go down a couple notches to the away from pop culture and into your areas of expertise, then trend analysis can be very, very helpful. Any other questions? Hopefully the answers I've given have given you a few nuggets that you can play with. Again, we will be publishing this as a blog post along with the recording, assuming that the tech worked, and the slides, and links to all these resources that we've mentioned. So by all means, if you want to continue the conversation in social or on the blog itself, we will send it around and make that available. We're about 10 minutes from the hour here now, so I'm going to sort of do a last call for questions, and then if we have satisfied your curiosity and provided some value, then hopefully mission accomplished. So, and Robin has just put the flight manual URL there in the chat box. Either URL, the one on the screen in the slide, or that works just fine. So you can pop in and grab our full document on how we think social media and digital strategy should unfold within an organization. So looks like we don't have any more questions, so I'm going to call it a day. So thanks so much for attending. Hope that we've added a little bit of value to your blogging circumstance, and look forward to talking to you on the social medias. So thanks for coming out. Watch for follow-up emails with links, blog posts, and follow-up resources. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.